Hello. Today I would like to talk a little bit about the term Nazi and how it is bandied about with almost a reckless abandonment, as if it's this ultimate trump card, since it's often used about him, to in the ultimate type of ad hominem attacking someone's character rather than attacking their ideas. It finds some traction because pretty much everyone agrees that the ideas protracted by the National Socialist Party, or Nazis, were abhorrent and aberrant and deserve condemnation, which is funny because they, of course, disagreed. Almost all attacks using this particular ad hominem are attacks that ought to be immediately dismissed because the Nazis make too convenient a scapegoat in order to be really useful in describing anyone, no matter how villainous they may happen to be. People like to apply this particular ad hominem denigration towards President Trump. It's used to shut people down, to shut them up. And I have to wonder sometimes the people who use this particular personal indemnification, how they justify doing so, if they've ever met one. I have. And it's not something I'm terribly proud of. It's not something I went looking for. It's a consequence of circumstances utterly beyond my control and a lack of awareness and experience to where eventually I learned to recognize them, but until then, they were some of the creepiest experiences of my life up to that point, and they still rank in the top 5 encounters with Nazis in Austria. They're almost soulless men. I never met one who was a woman. The men I met were almost completely soulless, and they revealed themselves to me because they assumed, based on the way I look and the way I was dressed, maybe the way I behaved and who I was, that I agreed with them. And I don't. Not in any way, shape, or form. Not with their politics, not with their economic strategy, not with their sense of superiority, not with anything that they tried to do. Their hubris and arrogance. I mean, if anyone deserves that title, it's not Donald Trump. So let me tell you the story. I was called to serve as a missionary for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and ended up serving in Austria, which we all know is one of the foreground stomping grounds for the National Socialist movement. Adolf Hitler himself is from Austria. He was born in Braunau am Inn. I have been to the town where he was born. We went there because I didn't live very far from that. I was stationed at first in Riedem-Innkreis, which is probably an hour by car or less from Braunau am Inn in Upper Austria, south of the German border. Braunau am Inn is a border town. If you arrive in Braunau am Inn and you happen to look in any way, shape, or form the way I do, when you arrive in Braunau am Inn, if you start walking the streets, the people there immediately will assume that you are there because you are there to see Hitler. We arrived curious. That's why we were there. Not because we're fans, but because we're in Austria. What do you do in Austria? You learn about the people and the culture. So we drove to Braunau am Inn, got out of the car, started walking around, and somebody asked us, "Are you here to see Adolf Hitler?" and stuff, basically. And we said, yeah. So he took us around the corner, and there at the time was this gargantuan statue of Adolf Hitler giving the famous Hitlerian salute, which has since been torn down. The gentleman also took us to the house in which Adolf Hitler was born, which the Austrian government is now considering tearing down. And we ended up at the church in the middle of the town square, where a woman asked us if we would like to see where Adolf Hitler and his family sat. And the creepy part about that was, well, several creepy parts. I thought he was a Jew. I've heard that rumor. Number 2, they still cordon off his place. Like, you're not allowed to sit there. This is where the Hitler sat. No one can sit there. It's like General Gage's booth at Old North Church. Like, I don't understand why we care about that. And that he sat there and listened to a Christian preacher. But then again, we've had a president in this country who sat in a race-baiting pastor's church, and nobody seems to be upset about that, or even aware, maybe, of the Reverend Jeremiah Wright. You can look that up later. Braunau is by far and away one of the creepiest places on earth I have ever been. I hear it's not the same anymore. It has been over 20 years since I was there. And we never went back for any reason. That's not where my experience with Nazis ended. I remember tracking one day in Deutsch-Wagram, which is just north of Vienna. And I was out with, can't remember his first name, his last name was Dospil. We knocked on this old man's door, and this man says to us, you can't imagine what it possibly was like to live under that regime. You're too young. And Brother Dospil says, I was in the Wehrmacht. And all of a sudden, this guy's arguments evaporated. I also met a guy, not in that ward. I think he was in the Hagam Hausruck congregation, and he told me a story about how he was in the Wehrmacht army, and they had rounded up a bunch of women and children. They were naked in a field. It was winter, and the Waffen-SS commander ordered his commander to gun them all down, and his commander refused to do so, so the SS shot him down on the spot and told the unit, you can either follow our orders or you can join him. And this gentleman told me, to my everlasting shame, we gunned down those women and children. Not everybody in Austria was a Nazi. And not everybody who claims to be a Nazi is one, but there are some in Austria. I forget where they were exactly, but I know at the time we marked their houses. We were expressly forbidden as missionaries to preach the gospel to or baptize in any way, shape, or form any person who had once been a registered member of the Nazi Party. Now, there were some. My first Sunday meal with a member, I walked into this woman's home. She wasn't finished with the meal yet, so I wandered out into the hallway to look at pictures, and there was this gigantic picture in the hallway. It was probably at 11 by 14 or larger of German general standing there shaking hands with Adolf Hitler. That was her husband. She wasn't a Nazi, as far as I can tell, but I could tell some were. We ran into one in that area, just to the south of Eberschwang, Austria. I remember because we blacked out his house in permanent marker. We had these gigantic maps, and even back then, that many years ago, they showed like every building, so you could check off exactly, been there, been there, been there. And we blacked it out so you couldn't erase it. Do not go to this place, because we were not supposed to. Years before I was there, a significantly high-ranking member of the SA or the SS had been baptized into the church, and it caused all sorts of conundrum because, oh my gosh, they're affiliating with those people. So we were told to avoid them at all costs. So when we found this one, we marked it. And I knew he was one because we knocked on the door, and he was excited to see us, which is totally not the norm for missionaries. People are excited. Well, they're either like super prepared or there's reason to be suspicious. And I was suspicious because I guess I've always been suspicious. And he said, I have a book for you. And he came back with an original, leather-bound, script-written copy of Mein Kampf. Honestly, I will tell you, I was tempted to take it. Not because I believed in it, but for its historical value. An original copy. I did not take it. We left quickly. The only other one I remember was outside of Salzburg, so just east of Salzburg, in a city called Strasswalchen, where we knocked on a door and a man said, oh, I have something for you. Please come in. So we came in, and this happened regularly in that area where people would give us copies of the Book of Mormon back. Oh, someone left this, give it to someone else. I don't want it. And he came out with a copy of Die große weiße Rasse, the Great White Race. Again, I didn't take that. So we marked down his house as do not visit. I have been in their houses. I have talked to them. I have looked into their eyes. And you know what I remember seeing? Absolutely nothing. It's like they had no soul. If you look into a regular person's eyes, there's like some sort of light. Sometimes it's just reflecting off the lights in the room, but there's light in them. And these people were so devoid of light. I remember looking into their eyes and saying nothing. The only other one I ever ran into was a man who I believe was possessed by the devil. We knocked on his door in Floridsdorf, which is also just north of Vienna, and he answered the door and said, hello, when welcome, I am Joseph, the Lamb of God. And I knew this was going to be bad. This is a man who when I began speaking to my companion in English, who didn't speak any English, said to us, "I know exactly what you're saying, so speaking in English will not keep it a secret from me." And one of his friends said, "I didn't know you speak English." And it was like clear as a day, I would say to myself, or somebody I know would speak to me, perfect English, perfectly understandable. These are not average, ordinary people. They're evil people. And to compare anyone, no matter how bad they may be to one, is a cheap shot, a low blow, and way, way, way too convenient. There are so many other things that we could say about people. It's ironic that this is also the country where the sound of music is from. A land of rejoicing and song. A land where there's beauty everywhere. And what do we think about the people there? All we remember about Austria is the Nazis. Those Nazis are mostly gone. These men that I met are probably dead. I can't remember how old they were, but they're probably dead now because that was a long time ago. World War II ended 75 years ago this year. And so to assume that a lot of those are around is pretty nonsensical. To assume that their ideas are existent, yeah, I believe that. But nobody's had the opportunity or the willpower to follow in the footsteps of those conniving, scheming, abhorrent, aberrant, ultra-crepidarians since that day. Thank God for that. If you've never met a Nazi, thank your lucky stars. If you've ever called someone a Nazi who didn't deserve it, check yourself. Ask yourself, am I drawing attention to the mote in their eye to distract from the beam in my own? Because there's something good in almost everyone. And if you choose to just see the bad, or if you choose to jump the shark and go straight to Nazification of an individual, you've robbed everyone else that ever hears you say that of getting to know them for who they really are. Maybe there are people out there who deserve that particular nom de plume. I've never met one that wasn't actually a member of the SS who deserved to be called a Nazi. And I'll bet you if you ask survivors of the camps, they would tell you how lucky you are that you've actually never met one. The words that we use mean something. I guess I want to kick about that of late. They change the way we see the world, and they change the way others see what we have to say. I remember when I was young being taught that if you can't say something nice, don't say anything at all. And calling someone a Nazi is definitely not something nice. I mean, if they're wrong, they're wrong. But there are other things you can call them that are probably far more apropos, far more descriptive, and not as overarchingly condemnatory as jumping to the term Nazi. I'm glad in a way that I met them. Not because I'm glad to have met a Nazi, but because I'm glad of the perspective that it gives me. Just like Princess Jasmine bewailed living in the palace and wanted and romanticized living in the streets, sometimes we romanticize our perspective and we jump to conclusions because we don't have the experience necessary to make the proper conclusions and to judge people as they really are. What we do defines us, yes, but it is very rare that anyone does this only one thing. I try to stay away from the words always and never because they're very difficult standards to attain, to achieve, and to maintain. And it is very rare that someone rises to that low point of life to where they have earned the term and where they deserve to be lumped in with those men. It's not, I think, accidental that in Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, Henry Jones Sr. refers to them as the armies of darkness. I don't think we've ever seen an army of darkness like that. That doesn't mean that we won't, but we don't have one yet. There are people who probably wish they could join it. Donald Trump's not one of them. I'm not saying he's a saint. I'm not going to beatify the dude, but he's definitely worthy of a different title than Nazi. I ask you, if you've never met one, to thank God that you've never met one, and to stop using the term to describe anyone who isn't actually one. You want to talk about Hermann Hesse and Goebbels and Goering and Hitler himself and use that term, fine, have a nut, knock yourself out, because it fits. They actually were. In modernity, that term is antiquated and misinterpreted and misanthropic, and it's better you find some other way to describe people other than some parallelism to an ideology that no one will ever come out and say they agree with until Nazis actually really do return. And when they do, they'll call themselves something else. I guarantee you. They might actually be the people who are using the term to criticize others, because that's something a Nazi would do. With that, I think we'll close it out. Godspeed, good luck, and thank your lucky stars you've never met the Nazis. And if you have, thank you for all that you did to stop them. Our world would definitely be worse off if they had been allowed to spread across the face of the earth. Take care of one another and check yourself. Look at your own flaws as you look at others with theirs. Ciao.